Hi, I'm Callie. My brother told me our mother left him everything because he was the oldest. What he forgot to mention was that I'd been sleeping on a cot in her hospital room for 4 years. He showed up 3 days after the funeral, handed me a bill for back rent, and asked me to sign over the life insurance. I didn't sign anything, but I did make one phone call that changed everything. Let me tell you how it started. It was a Tuesday in February when I first noticed something was wrong. Not with my mother. She'd been sick for years, and I'd learned to read her body like a weather map. I mean, something was wrong with the paperwork. I was sitting at the kitchen table in her house in Bellingham, Washington, the one with the gray shingle siding and the rhododendron out front that bloomed every April like it hadn't gotten the memo about everything falling apart. I'd been sorting through her mail while she slept, the way I did every morning before my shift at the clinic started. Insurance explanations, prescription summaries, a letter from her financial advisor reminding her to update her beneficiary designations. I almost set that last one aside. I'd seen a dozen of them over the years, but something made me open it. The letter referenced an account I didn't recognize, a secondary investment account she'd apparently opened 18 months earlier. I'd never heard her mention it. I set the letter down, went to make coffee, and told myself it was nothing. She probably just forgot to mention it. She forgot a lot of things by then. Her afternoon medications, whether she'd eaten, the names of the nurses who came twice a week to check her vitals. I didn't read anything into it. I just added it to the pile of things I'd ask her about when she had a better day. A better day never really came after that. By March, she was in and out of the hospital. By April, she was home on hospice. My brother flew in from Phoenix for 4 days during that stretch. The first time I'd seen him in 14 months. He stayed at a hotel downtown, not at the house, because he said the medical equipment made him anxious. He brought her flowers from the airport gift shop and sat beside her bed for about 40 minutes total across 4 days. He cried in a way that made everyone in the room feel like they were supposed to comfort him. Then he flew back to Phoenix and didn't call for 6 weeks. I didn't leave. I hadn't left in 4 years, not for more than a few days at a time. I'd moved back home at 31 when her oncologist used the phrase aggressive progression for the first time, and my mother laughed it off and then cried in the car on the way home. I'd been renting a nice apartment in Seattle then, working full-time as a medical assistant at a cardiology practice, seeing someone I thought might actually go somewhere. I gave up the apartment, put my furniture in storage, ended things with the man I was seeing, not dramatically, just honestly. I told him I didn't know how long I'd be gone and that it wasn't fair to ask him to wait. He said he understood. He didn't wait. I moved into my old bedroom and built a life out of proximity. I took a part-time position at a walk-in clinic in Bellingham to keep my income steady. I learned which of her medications had to be taken with food and which ones made her nauseated and which ones she'd hide under her tongue and spit out when she thought I wasn't looking. I drove her to appointments. I sat through the conversations her doctors had that she couldn't process alone. I held her hand during the ones where there was nothing left to say except to ask about comfort measures. My brother called on birthdays and holidays. Sometimes. When my mother died in May, it was a Thursday evening, and I was the only one in the room. I had been reading to her a mystery novel she'd loved in her 60s that we'd read together twice over the past year. She stopped breathing quietly, between one paragraph and the next, like she'd simply decided she was done listening. I sat with her for a few minutes before I called anyone, not because I was frozen, but because I wanted one last moment where it was just the two of us and nothing had changed yet. Then I called the hospice nurse. Then I called my brother. He arrived 2 days later. I'd already handled the funeral home, notified her doctors, begun sorting through the immediate paperwork. He walked into the house, looked around at everything I'd done, and said, "Thanks for keeping things together." It sounded like something you'd say to a hotel housekeeper. The estate attorney called us both in the following week. I sat in a leather chair in a beige office and listened while a man I'd never met explained that my mother had updated her will 14 months earlier, around the same time that financial advisor letter had arrived. The new will left the house, the savings, and the investment account to my brother. My name appeared in one place, a single sentence that left me her jewelry and any personal effects she may have designated. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I just sat very still and watched the fluorescent light above the attorney's desk flicker slightly, the way cheap fixtures do when they're on their way out. My brother nodded slowly as the attorney read, the way people do when they're pretending they didn't already know. But I had 4 years of reading people's faces in hospital rooms, and I knew what pretending looked like. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. I pulled into the driveway of the house I'd lived in for 4 years. The house I'd rearranged to accommodate a hospital bed and a medication station and a shower bench and a weekly visiting nurse. And I sat in the car for a long time staring at the rhododendron, which had bloomed again right on schedule. She'd changed the will while I was living there, while I was waking up at 3 in the morning to check if she was still breathing, while I was on hold with her insurance company, while I was learning the names of her medications like a second language. She'd done it without telling me, which meant she'd done it knowing I wouldn't agree, and she'd done it anyway. I didn't go inside right away. I drove to the waterfront instead, parked near the marina, and walked along the path until I ran out of path. The bay was flat and gray and indifferent, which felt appropriate. I stood there long enough for my hands to go cold. Then I went back to the car, drove home, and made dinner from whatever was still in the refrigerator. 2 days later, my brother texted me. Not called, texted. Hey, attorney said you should start thinking about moving out of the house within 30 days. No rush, but want to get the estate settled. Also found out mom had some medical equipment in the house that's technically part of the estate inventory. Can you make a list? I read the text 3 times. Then I set the phone face down on the counter and washed the dishes by hand, slowly, even though the dishwasher was right there. The medical equipment he wanted inventoried, the hospital bed, the shower bench, the bedside commode, the portable oxygen concentrator. I had receipts for all of it because I had bought all of it. My mother's insurance had covered some things. The rest I'd purchased myself over 4 years on a part-time medical assistant salary because the alternative was watching her be uncomfortable, and I couldn't do that. I didn't respond to his text that day or the next. He called on Friday. His voice was careful, measured, the tone of someone who had decided in advance how the conversation was going to go. I wanted to make sure you got my message, he said. I got it. I know this is a lot. Losing mom, the transition. I want to make this as smooth as possible for both of us. For both of us. Like we were equally affected. Like he'd spent the same 4 years I had. The medical equipment, I said. The hospital bed, the oxygen unit, the shower chair, I paid for those. I have receipts. A pause. Mom's estate paid for her medical care. Her insurance paid for some of it. I paid for the rest. Out of my own account, I have documentation. Another pause, longer this time. I'd have to look into that. You do that, I said. And I hung up. That night, I opened the folder on my laptop that I'd been adding to for 4 years without fully realizing I was building something. Receipts from the medical supply company, bank statements showing transfers, emails from her doctors that I'd been copied on, invoices from the visiting nurse agency I'd helped select, photos I'd taken of the medication schedule I'd designed, the supply closet I'd organized, the whiteboard by her bed with the day's appointments and her water intake goals. I hadn't kept these things as evidence. I'd kept them the way caregivers keep things. Because when you're the person responsible for someone's life, you document everything, because everything matters and nothing can be left to memory. But sitting there that night with the folder open, I understood for the first time that documentation was also proof, and proof had a use. I called my own attorney the following morning, not a family law specialist, a general practice attorney I'd used once before when I had a landlord dispute in Seattle. She listened to everything I told her, asked several careful questions, and then said something that stayed with me. The issue isn't whether you're entitled to the estate. The issue is what you can demonstrate you contributed to it and to her care. Those are often different legal questions. What do I need? Everything you just described. All of it. I spent the weekend organizing. The receipts, the bank statements, the emails, the photographs. I also pulled together something I hadn't thought of initially, a log I'd kept on my phone, a running note I'd started in the first year of her illness to track her symptoms, her medication responses, her good days and bad days. I'd started it because her doctors asked me to. It ran to over 200 pages by the time she died. It had timestamps going back 47 months. I sent everything to my attorney in a compressed file and labeled it simply, documentation. My brother sent another text that week. This time it wasn't about the house. Hey, going through mom's finances and realized there's an outstanding balance on her visa from the last year. Some of the charges look medical. I think a lot of those were probably yours since you were living there. Can you take a look and see what you owe? I stared at the text for a long moment. Then I took a screenshot and forwarded it to my attorney with one line. This just arrived. She called me that afternoon. This changes the nature of the conversation, she said. I know. I want you to stop responding to him directly. From this point forward, everything goes through me. I felt something loosen in my chest when she said that. Not because I was afraid of him, I wasn't, but because I had been carrying the weight of managing his expectations on top of everything else for weeks, and being told I no longer had to do that felt like setting down something heavy I hadn't realized was in my arms. I texted my brother one final time before going silent. My attorney will be in touch. He called 4 times in the next 2 days. I didn't pick up. He texted twice more. The first message confused, the second one sharper. Something about how I was being dramatic and making a hard time harder for everyone. I read it and felt nothing in particular. Being called dramatic by someone who had attended his mother's death in 4-day increments from a hotel downtown was a kind of criticism I could live with. My attorney filed a formal claim against the estate on my behalf for reimbursement of documented out-of-pocket caregiving expenses. The total, across 4 years, came to just over $31,000. She also sent a certified letter noting that several items of personal property in the home, specifically the medical equipment, had been purchased by me and were not part of the estate inventory. I received a voicemail from my brother the same afternoon the letter was delivered. He sounded different than he had before, less measured, more rattled. He said I was being vindictive. He said our mother would be horrified. He said that after everything the family had been through, the last thing anyone needed was lawyers. I didn't return the call. What I did instead was drive to the house. I still had a key, technically, for another 2 weeks, and quietly removed the medical equipment I had purchased. The shower bench, the bedside commode, the portable oxygen concentrator in its carrying case. I loaded them into my car with the help of a friend I'd called that morning, a woman I'd known since nursing school who had driven 2 hours from Olympia without asking why. You okay? She asked as we loaded the last of it. Getting there, I said. I donated the equipment to a medical lending program in town that same afternoon. I'd found the organization years earlier and had already been referring clients from the clinic to them. The woman at the intake desk recognized my name. She thanked me. I drove home feeling, if not exactly better, then at least cleaner. 3 weeks later, my attorney called with an update. My brother had agreed to settle the reimbursement claim. Not the full amount we negotiated down to $22,000, but enough. Enough to matter, enough to be real, enough to mean that what I had done for 4 years was acknowledged somewhere in writing, even if it was only in a settlement agreement in a file drawer at a law office in Bellingham. I moved out of the house on a Thursday. I didn't make it a moment. I just packed my car, did a final walkthrough to make sure I hadn't left anything I needed, and locked the door behind me. I put the key in an envelope and left it on the kitchen counter without a note. There was nothing I needed to write. The rhododendron was blooming again when I walked to my car. I glanced at it once, the way you glance at something you've looked at so many times it no longer surprises you. Then I drove to my new apartment, a small 1-bedroom on the north side of town with good light and a kitchen window that looked out over a quiet street. I'd signed the lease 2 weeks earlier. The first space I'd chosen for myself in 4 years. That evening, I ordered Thai food and ate it at my kitchen table, which was still the only piece of furniture I owned because the rest was in storage in Seattle from when I'd moved back home. I had a table, 2 chairs, a lamp, and my laptop. The room echoed slightly when I moved. It was quiet. The good kind. My phone buzzed once around 9. A cousin I liked, asking if I was settling in. I replied with a short message, something honest and brief. She sent back a line that made me smile. I didn't hear from my brother for 2 weeks after the settlement. When he finally reached out, it was a single text that said, "Hope you're doing okay." I read it, set the phone down, and went back to the book I was reading. Not because I was angry, though I had been. Not because I wanted him to feel the silence, that wasn't really the point. But because I had learned, slowly and then all at once, that some responses aren't owed, that sometimes a closed door isn't a statement, it's just a closed door, I've thought a lot about what I would do differently. The honest answer is not much, and also everything. I wouldn't have given less to my mother. I couldn't have. That's not how I'm built. But I would have protected myself more carefully while I was doing it. I would have had harder conversations earlier, when there was still time for them to mean something. I would have said out loud, to her, to him, to anyone who would listen, I am doing this, and it is costing me, and I need you to know that even if it doesn't change anything, I stayed silent because I didn't want to make her illness about myself. I understand now that naming what you're doing isn't making it about yourself. It's just telling the truth. These days I work full-time again, back in a cardiology practice, different city. I moved to Portland 6 months after I left Bellingham, not running from anything, just ready to be somewhere that didn't hold the shape of the last 4 years. I have an apartment with an actual couch now. I have houseplants. I have a standing dinner reservation with 2 friends every other Thursday. I still think about my mother often. Not the version of her who changed her will without telling me. I've made my peace with the fact that I may never fully understand that, but the version who used to sit on the porch with me in the evenings during her first year of treatment, when the prognosis was uncertain but hope was still reasonable, and talk about books she wanted to read and places she'd never been. That version I keep clearly. My brother and I are not close. We weren't before, and we aren't now. We send brief messages at holidays, which is more than some families manage and less than others. I don't hold what he did in that first month against him with the sharpness I once did. He made choices that prioritized himself, and I made choices that prioritized her, and we both live with what those choices cost us. I got a card in the mail last October from a woman whose mother I'd cared for briefly at the clinic in Bellingham, a patient I barely interacted with. Just a few appointments over a few weeks. She said her mother had mentioned me specifically in her last days, said I was one of the few people who'd made her feel like she still mattered. I sat with that card for a long time. I wasn't invisible. I was just in rooms where the wrong people held the pen. If you've ever been the one who stayed, who rearranged your whole life around someone who needed you, who showed up in the middle of the night and the middle of the morning and every ordinary Tuesday, I want you to hear something clearly. The fact that it went unrecognized doesn't mean it went unseen. It was real. It counted. And choosing to stop giving it to people who treated it as a given isn't failure. It isn't even loss. It's just finally deciding that what you carry deserves to be carried somewhere it's wanted. I'm still figuring out what that looks like, but I'm doing it in a city I chose, in an apartment I like, with a kitchen window that catches the morning light, and I didn't pick up the phone. I'd love to know, have you ever given everything to someone who rewrote the story without you in it? Have you been called dramatic for finally drawing a line? Drop a 1 in the comments if this hit something real for you. Tell me where you're watching from. This channel is for people who are done carrying the weight alone. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. There's more coming. Real stories, honest endings, and people like you learning what it means to finally put something down. I used to think that being the person who stayed was its own kind of answer. That if I showed up long enough, quietly enough, consistently enough, the people around me would eventually understand what that cost. I thought presence was proof. I thought sacrifice spoke for itself. It doesn't. And I say that not with bitterness, but with the kind of clarity that only comes after you've stopped waiting for someone to notice. What happened to me? What happened to Callie follows a logic that has nothing to do with luck or timing. It follows the logic of what we teach people about how we expect to be treated. For 4 years, I absorbed every financial burden without documentation, every emotional weight without conversation, every missed opportunity without complaint. I told myself that was love. And it was, partly. But it was also a slow lesson I was teaching everyone around me, that I would give without limit, that I would not ask to be seen, and that the cost of my choices was mine alone to carry. The hard truth is that the people who took advantage of that weren't entirely wrong about what I had taught them. They were wrong about what it meant, wrong about what it would last, wrong about what I was owed in return. But they had learned from me that I wouldn't say stop, so they didn't stop. That's not a reason to become someone who gives less. Generosity isn't the problem. Generosity without honesty is. The moment I started keeping records, not out of suspicion, but out of self-respect, something shifted. I was no longer asking to be believed. I had made it so the truth existed outside of my own memory, where no one could rewrite it. That's not pettiness. That's intelligence applied to a situation where emotion alone was never going to be enough. There's a kind of courage that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't raise its voice at the dinner table or send long messages at midnight. It shows up in a law office on a Tuesday morning with a folder of receipts. It takes $31,000 of invisible labor and makes it visible, line by line, date by date, amount by amount. It doesn't demand to be loved in return. It only demands to be counted. The settlement my attorney reached wasn't justice in any perfect sense. It was acknowledgement. And sometimes acknowledgement, documented, formal, signed, is the closest thing to justice that real life offers. I took it. I moved forward. I didn't need more than that. What I carry now isn't resentment. It's a different understanding of what I'm willing to let go unnamed. The people who matter to me know what I do for them, because I've learned to say it plainly, not as a transaction, just as truth. This is what I'm giving. This is what it costs me. I'm doing it because I want to, and I need you to know that. If you've ever been in a room where your name was the only one not written down, I want you to understand something. The pen was never theirs to hold alone. You can pick it up. You can write your own record. And when the time comes to walk out the door, you can do it knowing that what you carried was real, that you carried it well, and that you chose, finally, deliberately, without apology, to put it down.